Well, to talk more about it, we're joined in the studio by Keri Brennan, who is chair of Hillingdon Against HS2, a campaign group which has been fighting against the high-speed rail project. And also joining us from our studio in Salford is Chris Fletcher, who is the Deputy Chief Executive for Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce. Thank you both very much indeed. Well, obviously, you're arguing from different perspectives. Yeah. You're very personal. That's the business view. So let's come to you first of all, Keri Brennan, for your personal take on all of this.
Okay, well, my personal take on it is that it's critical that the argument for HS2 is correct for whatever losses someone might suffer personally or as a taxpayer in funding the scheme. And I don't think those benefits have been proven as well as people would like us to believe. And I think if there's business benefits, then business should have wanted to fund it or help fund it. There's been no evidence of that. And therefore we're left with us funding it as taxpayers and many taxpayers bearing the brunt of the scheme as well. And there's no evidence of a focus on poverty or local travel for local jobs or waiting lists, school places, building schools for the future. There's so many other priorities I personally and many others feel could come before this.
Now, you've corralled your arguments against it, obviously, because you were affected very personally. Just tell your story, actually.
Well, I bought my house in July 2009, and then in March 2010, the Labour government announced that they were going to build HS2, and we sort of stumbled across the fact that it was going to go through our garden, or our house, we thought at the time. And then, we've sort of fought for information, tried to gather information. We've never been written to directly by the government about our property and warned about it. Everyone stumbled across it. They wrote to everybody purely about road shows, and they wrote to people at great distance from the line as well. It wasn't a really personal communication. And then we believed then for a long time, until this morning in fact, that we were going to lose possibly our home, but most likely our garden, and be forced to live in really unbearable circumstances through building work, and then 576 of these trains a day through our garden, and also right next to the school that our children will go to when they're 11.
OK, well, let's put some of that to Chris Fletcher, because obviously Keri coming up with a lot of issues there, Chris Fletcher. I mean, just picking up on the personal impact, I suppose, on a lot of people, because that's what's galvanised opposition to this in a lot of cases. Do you think that the economic benefits outweigh the personal impact that it was potentially going to have on some and will still have on others?
Well, there's two very different issues there. And coming at it from the economic point of view, the facts and figures speak for themselves. The benefit-cost ratio for High Speed 2, which is the benefits you get from the investment that you put into it, is certainly equivalent to any other rail scheme that's gone out there. And I think the other thing to say about that is it's the broad base of those economic benefits. This is designed to help the country as a whole. It's not just a local transport project or anything like that. It's designed really to get the British economy back up and running and play a key part within that. The other thing is around the funding of it. I mean, we've already seen, for example, with Crossrail in London, where the local business community is paying extra business rates to help fund part of that. I've not seen yet any sort of funding mechanism or funding proposals for where this will come from for the cost of HS2. And what's got to be said is, at the end of the day, the trains are getting full. If you need to go on an intercity journey in this country, which a great number of businesses and residents do, people that have no business interest but just want to use transport, it's getting increasingly difficult.
But on that point, sorry, some opponents say, well, actually you could deliver better benefits to more people more quickly for less money by just investing in the current rail infrastructure rather than building something completely new.
Well, that level of investment is already taking place. For example, here in Manchester, we're working on a campaign at present around what's called the Northern Hub, and that's very much designed about increasing capacity on local rail in the north of England. And that's £500 million, and we're saying to government, this is an important part of it. HS2 is very important, obviously, but don't ignore the local transport and the local rail infrastructure. And if you look at some of the schemes that are going in London, the Crossrail Thames Link, there's a lot of schemes happening now in the West Midlands, there's a lot happening in the north of England. That investment is going in there as well. That's fine on a very local basis, but for example, if I'm wanting to get down to London and I'm using the West Coast Main Line, those trains are getting increasingly more difficult to get onto. It's not about the time element, it's actually about being able to get onto those trains to do business. And obviously there will be, you know, personal impact. Any sort of major infrastructure, any sort of major transport scheme like this, unfortunately it is going to impact. But that again is a sign of very limited space that we've got in the UK, and the fact that things are beginning to grind to a halt.
Well,
HS2 is a way of unpacking that.
Okay, I just wanted to bring Keri Brennan in again, because on that point, I mean, your house is now is not going to be as adversely affected as you thought. There is going to be a tunnel running along behind your garden, and I think in all, half of the new line is going to be, the impact of the new line is going to be mitigated by tunnelling and cutting. Does that improve the situation in your view? I mean, do you take any of the economic arguments that you're hearing there, and as long as it doesn't impact too adversely on too many people, it's a project that is worth it for our country?
I don't believe, from everything I've seen and all the people that I've worked with over the last 18 months, that the capacity argument is that simple. I don't think one train to Birmingham and then on to Manchester and Leeds will fix it. I think we've got a whole country that some places haven't even got electrified rail yet, you know, down to the West Country. And I think regardless of who it affects and where it goes, it needs to be something better than this. I really don't understand why Manchester business leaders are happy to wait for 20 years for something like this. And I think it was clear at the Transport Select Committee that the real experts that were invited by them were adamant that the North-South divide will not be cured by this, and that if anything, there'll be a drain factor where stuff is pulled away from them. And I love Manchester. I've lived there, I've worked there, I've worked in factories there. I'm married to a Mancunian. You know, I want Manchester to thrive, and I really want the Northern Hub and things like that to go ahead. But I don't think waiting 20 years for a project like this is the right way for any city. And I think, you know, everything's proved that if you have a big city like London, 70% of the jobs in the DfT own documents will be in London. So I don't think you should think it's good enough for anywhere like where you were. And
we're almost out of time. You're throwing a question there to Chris Fletcher, so let's let him very briefly answer that.
Well, I think it's quite important because, I mean, the West Coast Main Line, we've just come off the back of an intensive investment programme there that cost £10 billion, which is, you know, getting on for a third of the total cost of the high-speed rail, that you know, address some of the problems, but as a short-term measure. It's a bit of a money pit, but this is one way to solve the problem.
About a line, obviously, that's designed to end the North-South divide, could exacerbate it, some would argue, because it might lead to people actually heading south more than the other way.
There is still an awful lot of business done going into London. There's still an awful lot of business coming out. As I see it by my own eyes, you know, there's a lot of London businesses coming up to Manchester. But you've got to make it attractive for them to come. You've got to make it easy for them to come. And, you know, any transport link, it's got two ends. It's not just all one-way traffic. It's about a job for Manchester to make it attractive for businesses to come in.
We're out of time. Thank you both very much for sharing your thoughts with us tonight. Keri Brennan and Chris Fletcher. Thank you.